Welcome back to Composition and its Allies. My name is Barney. I'm a classical composer, and this is the channel for composers as well as performers that are interested in composition. French harmony exercises is for anyone who wants to go back to basics. I had to move to Paris, France. I did it for 5 years to properly learn harmony. Today's video, I want to share with you 3 very simple tricks so that you can make sure there's no parallel fifths or no parallel octaves in your harmony exercises. Let's begin. So on the screen here, we have a very simple bass exercise. It's root position chords for absolute beginners. So the first thing I recommend to make sure you don't have parallel fifths and parallel octaves is to follow the path of least resistance. What's the path of least resistance? So in the rules for root position chords, in part B, general rules, I talk about good voice leading, okay? And in general, the voices should move as little as possible. So stay in the same note. If you can't stay in the same note, move by step, and then as a last resort, leap. If you follow this too strictly, then you will have really a stale soprano that doesn't move. So it's a general bon consigne, we say in French, okay? But you can't always do it. So in this example A, I place the soprano on the third, and then I just move as little as possible, and I don't have any problems. Example B, start on the root, likewise, move as little as possible, don't have any problems. Example C, start on the fifth, likewise, no problems. So another thing I want to mention is that when you do harmony exercises, it's not just like all random all over the place. The French method, we get the outer voices. So you're provided the bass here, and you're going to get the soprano first, okay, and then you get the alto and tenor. However, what you'll probably find is if you don't test as you go a little bit with alto and tenor, then you're going to have like soprano that may be nice, but it doesn't work with the other voices. All right, so in example D, notice that the soprano is leaping. So you will have to do that to free up the tension, to get to a different elevation, just for aesthetic purposes. So just make sure that you look at the intervals. So we have a third going to another third. In harmony exercises, we don't write 10 or that. We just write the simplest version. And that's we're looking at distances. Okay. Then in E, notice that we're starting on a fifth. That's where you're going to be careful. So notice we're leaping in the same direction, which you almost never want to see happen between a soprano and bass. And then we have parallel fifths. Example F. We have a fifth going to another fifth, but they're leaping in opposite direction. This is, I think, unlikely because in general, you're not going to be doing random leaps. It's usually for an intentional purpose, but I just put it that you also can have it. Example G, we have that fifth between soprano and bass, and then we leap in the same direction. So again, just leaping in the same direction between bass and soprano is almost never a good thing. So, and here it's actually a very bad thing. So in this final example here, notice that I had placed the soprano on the fifth, and I just keep it on the same note, and we'd have no more issues. Now, one of the beauties of the French method is this rule that they say, I haven't heard it mentioned in America, would have been helpful, which is that when the bass moves by step, you move the other voices in opposite direction. One of the first things you'll learn when you learn root position chords in France, when the bass moves by step, other voices move in opposite direction. This is to avoid parallel fifths and parallel octaves. There is a major exception, which is for a deceptive cadence in which the leading tone does go up to the tonic, which is in the same direction as the bass. So as we can see here, we have a bass moving by step. It's going from a 4 to a 5 to a 6. Therefore, automatically, what you're thinking in your head, this is the root position chords, we're going to move in opposite direction. Notice here, I placed the fifth between the soprano and the bass. And since the bass is moving in the same direction and the soprano is moving in the same direction, well, it's inevitable you're going to have parallel fifths in this case. In example B, notice I had placed that fifth between the soprano and the bass, and then I go in opposite direction. So the soprano goes down to avoid those parallel fifths. It gets to the leading tone, so here it does resolve up in the same direction as the bass, even though the bass is moving by step. In example C, I have that fifth for the 5 chord between soprano and bass, and then To get to the 6, I move in opposite direction. Okay, so go down, so we have no parallel fifths. In example D, let's say I had that, I want to work backwards. Working backwards is something you're going to have to do a lot in harmony exercises because you'll get more information later on and you have to work your way back. This is a skill you're going to use, better believe it, in fugue and definitely in orchestration. So it's best to go to the source and learn harmony. So because the bass is ascending, that means that to get prior, the soprano is descending. So I'm on that D, so I have to ask myself what note is next in that F minor chord, and it's going to be the F. Before we continue, I just want to mention that we have a website now where we're hosting a lot of French harmony exercises. It's called school.com/composition, and just click on classroom and then go to French harmony exercises. I have rules for root position chords there, so please check it out. I also have a preparation for fugue course, so it's teaching suspensions, modulations, and sequences through French harmony exercises, and I'm currently in the process of building a 6-week absolute beginner French harmony course. So I hope when you have a moment, you'll take a look and see if anything will interest you. So we talked about some of the things that contribute to parallel fifths and parallel octaves. I want to just mention when I was in America, I was like writing the intervals. I was doing all this stuff. It's so heady, but this method is much quicker. So remember, just follow, just pass leads resistance. Don't do any kind of craziness unless it really is necessary. Like you need to move the soprano to a different elevation. Then when the bass moves by step, very critical, just move the voices in opposite direction. You're not going to have parallel fifths and parallel octaves, though you do need to follow resolve the tension for the step of cadence to make sure you resolve the leading tone up to the tonic. So look here, we have the soprano figured out, and now, like I mentioned previously, you want to test those middle voices. In example A, notice that I have a doubled third. So for root position chords, double check rules for root position chords. Part B, general rules, doublings, you want to double the root. The step of cadence, we double a third, but otherwise you want to double the root. When you get more advanced, you will double the third for aesthetic purposes or for balance, but in general, it's just really not a good idea. So here we have a doubled third. And then notice what happens. We follow the path of least resistance. So soprano and alto are moving as little as possible, but we have parallel eighths, parallel octaves. In example B, I went back to just a standard voicing. Okay, I have a doubled root. Okay, and then notice going from a 4 to a 5, the upper 3 voices move in opposite direction to the bass. Okay, likewise for the septive cadence going from 5 to 6, but of course the leading tone has to go up to the tonic. I hope you're starting to see how much simpler the French method is. I think I had a video recently called, I forget what it was called, but I talked about kind of the tyranny of how music harmony is taught in America, like through music theory. And it's so heady, it's so complicated, or it's like way too advanced and you're trying to tackle too many things at once. In France, we take it to the barest of barest, which is root position chords. It's still difficult, but it just frees up your mind to just focus on just like basic good voice leading. In example C, notice that I have a doubled fifth. So once you leave harmony exercises, you don't want to stay harmony exercises forever, and make sure when you compose, you don't try to integrate it because it'll get like really boring and safe music. But what you'll probably discover is when you go to compose later on, and when you're doing orchestration especially, you'll hear the beauty of a doubled fifth. Like a doubled fifth is a really nice sound, but at the beginning, it just presents too many problems. So notice here with a doubled fifth, the soprano and tenor just stay in the same note because that's what's simplest, but then we have parallel octaves. Now let's try to get this middle part here. So I place the soprano in number E, letter E. And notice that it's quite windy, right? So I placed it on the C and do, si, do, si, do. If you have a soprano that's very windy, that it's not seeming to go anywhere, that's probably an indication it's not the best soprano, and you want to look for a leap that can kind of free up some of that tension. So in example F, notice that I do, si, do, and then I leaped. So for the beginning, the bass is moving by step, so you just have to follow basic voice leading, move in opposite direction, then resolve that leading tone, and then afterwards I use a leap. So a deceptive cadence is what we often call a point de rassemblement in French. It's a point where you can regroup and reshuffle afterwards. In example G, notice what happens if I move in the same direction as that bass. Parallel octaves. In example H, I started to set it, so I root third, fifth. Very simple. It's not supposed to be complicated. In example I, then I get the next chord. Bass is moving my step. Other voices move in opposite direction. In example J, we resolve the septive cadence. So two of the voices move in opposite direction. They go down. One is going down a third, one is going down a second. The important thing is they go down. But the leading tone, which is in soprano, does resolve up the same direction as the bass. In example K, after septive cadence. So since we're doubling the third, it's a little bit dangerous because then things get a little awkward very quickly. So if I fail to move the tenor and just go to C, C, notice that this second chord here, there's no third, okay? Not only that, we have an octave between soprano and alto. Thereafter, they move in opposite directions opposed to moving the bass, but then we have parallel octaves. So therefore, when you get to the septive cadence is a very, very important moment in root position chords. This is why I want you to master ASAP. When you have the septive cadence, you have that doubled third, you're going to have to do something to readjust the balance because you're going from a doubled third to a doubled root. So notice here that the alto is also leaping up with the soprano to get that third, and thereafter we have doubled the root, and so we just move in opposite direction to the bass. If you'd like to work on this exercise specifically, it's now up on school.com/composition. Click on Classroom, then go to French Harmony Exercise, and then go to the Absolute Beginner folder. Thank you for watching. Have a good day.